When it comes to the productive garden, making sure vegetables have enough space to grow to maturity ensures you get a good crop. The truth is, I am not a very disciplined gardener. I commonly forget to do tasks, I often just make it up, and other times I get it completely wrong. But there is one area that I'm trying to be far more disciplined, and that is when it comes to thinning. I absolutely love growing lettuce. This is Freckles, and this brown one here is from my brother. I call it Ben's Best. And thinning is a really important part of growing any vegetable, really, but lettuce, it's pretty critical. So when they first germinate, I come through, I leave, say, about 5 centimetres between those small plants. Now, I don't want to thin to their eventual mature spacings at this point because they're still really vulnerable. Something might go wrong, so I leave more plants in the ground then. As they get a little bit larger, you can come through and thin to an even wider spacing. Also, just making sure there's enough space for ample air movement around the crop as you water them more. They're really susceptible to fungal problems, and that is one of the real benefits of thinning crops to the right space. And then, as these have gotten quite a bit larger, they're a little bit more difficult to pull out of the ground without disrupting the others. So a knife at the very base, thinning to about 10-15 centimetres between plants will ensure that those remaining plants can grow to full maturity, but I get a feed on the way. One group of plants that you do need to be really diligent about thinning are the root crops, because to develop a nice, straight, thick root to full maturity underground, they do need a little bit of space. When I'm doing carrots, I just use scissors to thin every few plants to get a good row. The same can be said with parsnips. If you don't thin them, they don't get to develop into those lovely, big, thick taproots. But there is one little myth that I want to bust, and that is about beetroot. Now, it's in the same camp as far as being a root crop, but they are way less fussy about growing in a crowd. You see, a lot of varieties have a seed which we call aggregate, which means there's multiple embryos, 2 or 3 plants, in each of these seeds. When they germinate, they're used to growing together. And so you can thin to little clumps of 3 beetroot and they will mature quite well growing in together. When it's time to harvest one, you just twist it out instead of ripping up the whole clump. Let the others continue to become even bigger and better, and you get even more beetroot for your space. One area where you really need to thin mindfully is when you've got a tray of mixed varieties. There's lots of varieties of plants, flowers and vegetables that you can get in a mixed seed pack, and it can be a good value way to get lots of variety in the patch. And when they germinate, they're actually going to do so at different stages, at different ages. It'll take a longer time for some than others, and they will have different vigour as well. Now, things like this is mixed silver beet. You can see really obviously, just by the colour of the seedlings, that they are different varieties. You've got yellows and pinks and reds. So in this case, it's quite simple to thin to a nice representation of the different varieties. But over here, you can see these are tomato seedlings, and I sowed these on the same day in the cells from 3 different varieties. And you can see how different the vigour is between these big, strong plants and this spindly little thing. A gardener's instinct is often to really thin to those biggest, strongest plants. But if I'd done that in a mixed tray, then I would have only been thinning to a single variety, which would have meant all of my mixed tomato seedling varieties would have been lost. I grow lots of things from seed, not just vegetables. And here I've got a lot of native shrubs, grasses, and perennials on the go. And thinning is also really important. So I'll commonly sow into these larger tubes direct, which means I skip that step of having to prick those tiny little seedlings out and move them into another pot. That's a place where they are quite vulnerable, but I still need to thin. So once I'm really confident that they're well established and they've been through that really vulnerable stage, I'll choose the strongest plant in each of those cells. I can pull one out, and then I'm ending up with a lovely strong plant in each of those cells. When I'm dealing with plants that are really, really tiny or particularly susceptible to root disturbance, I tend to use a pair of snips. That way I can snip out any of the excess plants without pulling and disrupting the roots of the one I want to keep. Now, it does feel a little bit wasteful, and I don't like chucking out little plants, but it is really important. In nature, not every seed that hits the ground reaches the sunlight. So I try and sort of harness my inner lyrebird or wallaby and do a little decisive destruction to get to the strongest plants. When it comes to growing lots of plants for very little money, there is no doubt that seed is the best way to grow. But if you want to get those full rewards, you're going to need to spend a little bit of time and sacrifice a few of those seedlings. But I promise, thinning is winning.